Greetings, friends, family, enemies, and strangers of all kinds. Welcome back to The Extra Milestone, your weekly film anniversary show where we go back in time to discuss the classic films that have made the cinematic landscape what it is today, for better and worse, which I think we'll see both of those in this episode. I am Sam Noland, as usual, the host of this show. I also frequently contribute to Cinemaholics, and I'm the host of Game Over, Man, the patron-exclusive podcast that I host with my friend that I have here with me right now. Everyone listening, please welcome back to Extra Milestone, Adonis Gonzalez. Adonis, how are you?
Oh my God, I'm doing great, Sam. How are you today?
Okay, we got a Don Travolta here joining the show, and we discovered
the worst case scenario for gene splicing if it were to ever occur.
We were just talking before recording this, and it turns out Adonis has an impeccable John Travolta impression.
I do. I don't know how.
Like, we literally just discovered this 10 minutes ago, and so expect that to make random appearances throughout the show. Adonis is a very frequent contributor to Cinemaholics. Adonis, you've been doing a ton of reviews over on the Cinemaholics website.
Oh, yeah. I have been really diving into the indie film world, especially now where video on demand was kind of already making a large uprising, but thanks to unfortunate events in our world, it's kind of the only safe way to watch movies right now, which has seen a spike in indie films available on demand or for rent. So I've just been watching like some really great indie thrillers, indie family movies, dramatic movies. I think recently I just did documentaries. Yeah, I think I just did the last one I just did was a review of The Nest with Jude Law, which really took me by surprise, went in completely blind. So definitely go see that one without knowing a single thing about it.
Yeah. So definitely go check out all of Adonis's reviews on Cinemaholics, especially we're just every day a new blockbuster is getting delayed to next year. So It's looking like this might kind of be the situation for a little while, even though theaters are open. They're just not back with the vengeance that we were maybe anticipating. So yeah, you're going to want to check out everything Adonis is doing over there.
This will be the first year since 2010 that Marvel does not have a movie coming out. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah, Black Widow just got delayed as we record this yesterday. Yeah. Although, are they still releasing those TV shows? We're off on a tangent already, but so be it. It is Adonis and I.
I think WandaVision is rumored to be coming out next month, but they have yet to announce a release date. So it's all up in the air at this point. Not sure what's going on behind the scenes there.
Well, I suppose only time will tell. Before we go any further, I just have a quick correction to make from last week. On the previous Extra Milestone, I had stated somewhat misleadingly, if that's even a word, that John Negroni was the one who initially decided to make the Extra Milestone a weekly show. That's not actually true. It was John's idea to sort of expand the show, but I was the one who kind of decided, like, I'm going to do it every week. So just a little behind the scenes info. Wanted to just make that clear before we get into the actual show. But Adonis, what do you say? Enough about the present. Please, for the love of God, enough with the present. I've had it. Let's talk about some movies. Now, we planned this episode like a month or so ago, or maybe a little bit more than that, and it's been one of the ones I've been looking forward to the most, because we are going to talk about two movies, both from 1985, that are, for my money, the two best movies of 1985, and also could not be more different in any way. It's kind of insane how completely diametrically opposed these movies are. A lot of times when we do more than one, there's often some kind of a weird connection between them, whether intentional or not. There's nothing, literally no similarity whatsoever. I think, Adonis, I thought a lot about this. We're going to talk about Come and See first.
All right, let me
It's good. Yeah, just take a deep breath now.
yeah, let me get prepared. Do some yoga, I guess.
Yes, please. Because okay, so Come and See is a 1985 war movie, or anti-war movie, more accurately, and it is made in the at the time the Soviet Union by director Elem Klimov, who directed this movie and then never worked again. Just felt that everything that needed to be said was said with this movie. And now I want to hear the story of how you first heard of this movie, Adonis, and then I'll tell mine.
I first heard about it from you, actually.
I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was any sort of if there was anything before that.
Oh no, no. You told me about it. Yeah, when we started planning this episode, you asked me if I wanted to come on, and you told me what we were doing, and I was like, "Come and see, what's that?" And you basically you told me it was an anti-war movie and that it was pretty rough to watch, and I was like, "Oh, you mean like Schindler's List?" And the thing that really piqued my interest and also like covered me with this sense of dread and like depression was when I asked you that, you said, "Oh, it's worse." And I was like,
Yep.
"Worse than Schindler's List?" And I checked the text again to make sure maybe I had misspelled Schindler's or something, and maybe you thought I was talking about a different movie, but nope, we were talking about the same Schindler's List. So, yeah, I mean, up until seeing it, I'll admit I did not fully believe you. I was like, okay, it'll be bad, but I've seen Schindler's List and I've seen movies like it. So how far can you really go with a movie, right? Alan Klimov knows how far you can go with a
Yeah,
movie.
it's incredibly intense. Now, I first heard of this movie about 5 or 6 years ago, and this is take a drink every time I bring up this list, listeners. I'm sure you're tired of it by now, but there was a list in 2008 that Empire magazine made of the top 500 movies ever made, and that was like it. I found it just as I was getting into movies, and there were a lot of them on the list that I had heard of, that I knew of, and everything. I was like, okay, I can see why that's one of the 500 greatest of all time. But there were a lot of them, if not the majority of the movies on this list, that I had never heard of, or at least had only vaguely heard of. And Come and See was one of the very highest ones. It was number 60 on the list, which is that's nothing to sneeze at. And what really got my attention was not the title, because the title is sort of nondescript. We'll actually talk about the title a little bit and the meanings behind it later on in the show. But what really got me was the poster. There have been various posters for this movie. Possibly the most striking one is this sort of abstract image of the protagonist, played by, let's hope I pronounce this correctly, Alexei Kravchenko, who was, I believe, 14 years old when they filmed this, and it's a miracle that he was just not completely broken by the experience of filming this. It's just him, and he's like really, like the lighting is really dark. You can barely see anything except his eyes, which are like bloodshot red. And you can see his hair a little bit, which is like, it looks almost silver, like as if he'd gone through something traumatic, which he has. And then just these really eerie red and blue lights on either side of his head. So just look up this poster if you've never seen it, and it'll spike your curiosity interest immediately. And then I read the description and I was like, oh, I've got to watch that. And this is like 15-year-old Sam. And so I did not realize what I was getting into. And then I watched it, and then it ended, and I thought, okay, I never have to watch that again. And I literally may have never seen it again if it weren't for this podcast. But I thought, because I was thinking, okay, I'll talk about it on the podcast, but I don't need to rewatch it. And then I saw the advertisement for the recent restoration of the movie done by Criterion. And I was like, oh my goodness, because you got to understand something, Adonis. Up until like literally just a couple of years ago, Come and See was, because it's an international release and because it is so hard to stomach for a lot of people, it had just never received an immensely high profile release. I think there was a DVD version that came out in like 2001 that was like maybe a different region, and it was just hard to get a hold of. And as such, the version, pretty much the only version that existed for the longest time, was this sort of grainy, low quality DVD rip on the internet. And that's what I saw back in 2015. And I was like, and that was enough. Like, I'm not really that much of a stickler for quality and stuff. But then I saw this trailer and everything was crystal clear. And I thought, okay, I have to watch it again as much as I don't want to. And so here we are. We're talking about the movie. So Adonis, I want to hear let's just get your initial reaction. Like, sort of give me a quick idea of what you thought of it. We've sort of alluded to it thus far, but in a nutshell.
Okay. In a nutshell, what I thought of this movie. I've never seen something that I absolutely loved that I never want to see again.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is so well made, especially for a movie of the time. Like, it's 1985, and this movie holds up so well. I never saw the version you saw before the restoration. I saw it on Criterion for the first time. Completely restored. So I don't know how it looked before, but in terms of the restoration, I mean, the audio, the picture, the quality of it all was great. The direction, there's a lot of really good POV shots. There's a shot of this plane looming over the character every once in a while that is very clearly death hanging over him. And that too, the symbolism, it's like a film student's like a paradise in those terms.
Interesting.
Everything else, it does not shy away from what it's trying to say. And I just remember the thing that keeps playing back in my head is that final 20 or so minutes where things just really hit the fan. And I kept thinking, okay, when are they going to turn away? When are they going to turn away? When are they finally going to just have it stop? And it kept going. And I was like, oh my God. And this was like 5 or 6 minutes into that scene. And I was like, I was looking at the bar for how much more of the movie there was. And it said, oh, there's like 40 minutes left. And I was like, you have to be kidding me. So yeah, in a nutshell, I love it as a movie, but I have a hard time even thinking about like how I'm going to recommend this to people because it's tough. It's a rough watch, a very rough watch. And I cannot sugarcoat that. And I cannot stress that enough. It is crazy, but yeah, it's a well-made movie for sure.
And that was 100% their intention. I want to give a little bit of the background on how this movie was made. So it was based on a book that was co-written by, and I'm going to butcher this name, so I apologize, but Ales Adamovich, I want to say Ales Adamovich, and called I Am from the Fiery Village. And it is written by someone who was alive during the events that take place in this movie. And it is the basic plot is that it's during World War II. It's 1943, I want to say. And it is in Belorussia, a sort of a smaller country that's sort of adjacent to Russia. And what happens is that we see these two kids on the beach. Mm-hmm. And we see an old man warning them, hey, you'd better not do this. And what we see that they're doing is they're digging through the trenches. And I have to assume these are World War I trenches, because what else would they be? They're looking for old rifles, because that's what they need to, as we find out what their goal is, to join sort of the resistance group that's amassing together to fight back against the invading Nazi forces. And they're trying to find weapons so that they can be allowed to be recruited into this resistance. And we see the protagonist of Fliora, I want to say, or Floria, perhaps. I actually forget where the Y is.
I think it's Fliora, yeah.
Fliora, yeah. And finds a rifle, goes home, and there's this like little 5-minute period before the actual plot gets going where you can see he's got this big smile on his face. He's excited to be fighting back, to be fighting for the motherland. And he's really happy. His mother, on the other hand, is this is the worst day of her life. Yeah, she cannot do anything about it. She's just angry and upset and sad and all of the above with her son for wanting to do this. And at one point hands him an axe and says, "Just kill us now and spare us the pain." This is 5 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
This is not even an inkling of what you're in for. And so the recruiters show up and take him out into the woods away from family. And that's really when it gets going. And for about a day or so, this kid is just sort of doing a lot of the menial tasks. Like at one point he's inside of a cauldron, scrubbing the inside of it with like pine needles and stuff and getting stuff thrown on him. Just all the stuff that no one wants to do, is having to stand guard at night. And one day they decide, all right, we're going to go out for a march. You, kid, stay behind. And so he does, and meets this young girl in the wood about his age named Glasha, who's played by Olga Mironova. They're just sort of like, at first they see each other and they start crying. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, they're both going through a lot. I imagine they're connecting in this moment. But then they sort of start bonding a little bit, just sort of spending time together. And then when they're in the woods, a plane flies overhead and bombs them.
Yeah.
And the rest of the movie never picks up from there. What goes on from there is this horrendous odyssey through just the darkest corners of humankind, as we see just like we see these two characters just try and escape the encroaching forces. We see them go back to the village at one point to try and find Fliora's parents, and that is one of the most horrifying scenes of the entire movie. And we see them come across other small detachments of resistance fighters. At one point they end up in another village that's being massacred. It is brutal. I know it sounds like we're being repetitive. We really cannot stress enough just how intensely disheartening this movie is. It feels so real that it's hard to believe that it isn't. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to believe that this is a movie.
I mean, like you said, it's shocking that the actor who plays Fliora, Alexei
Kravchenko. Yep.
Kravchenko, thank you. I was gonna destroy that. He is 50 years old now, I want to say 50 or 51. And
something like that.
It's very shocking that I've yet to read or watch any interviews with him yet, but I'm sure this movie left some sort of lasting effect on him, which it had to, because the way this movie is filmed, it is very practical, very on location, and I don't know what would be worse, being a part of it or watching it.
Being a part of it, definitely. I don't know if you read, and I mean, as much as horrifying as it is to watch it, I don't know, Adonis, if you read any of like the behind the scenes info of what was going on this set. Okay. So first off, I keep meaning to get to this. I keep getting sidetracked. So the idea that Elem Klimov had was that he wanted to tell this story of the way that this nation was massacred, because there's not a whole lot of stories specifically about that. We hear about the invasion of Poland. We hear about the way that the U.S. joined the war after a prolonged period of just sort of staying out of it. But there aren't a lot of stories about these very small villages, these very small nations that were just overrun by Nazi forces. And that was Elem Klimov's idea. He said, I want the world to know about this at any cost. They knew that if this movie was going to be effective, it was going to have to be one of the most horrifying things ever. I think the way I read it was that it was the late 70s. They knew the 40-year anniversary of the end of World War II was coming up. They wanted to make sure that the world did not forget. That was kind of the idea. And so when it came to casting the lead, they knew, okay, this is not going to be easy for this actor. We have to make sure we find the right person. And they were as concerned as they can be with this attempt. the way I read it was that they actually hired a hypnotist to come on the set to see if they could just sort of lessen the psychological toll on whoever they ended up casting. And as I've read about it, the hypnotism didn't work. Alexei Kravchenko was not susceptible to being hypnotized. He just had to deal with it. And he did it remarkably well. They filmed the entire thing in Belorussia. They wanted to make sure this was as authentic as could be. And they used live ammunition.
Really?
Why? Why would you do that? They tell stories of the director, especially Elem Klimov, tells the story about how there were times when bullets would pass like 4 inches over his head. It's amazing no one died on this set. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Uh-huh. Like, what do we even say to this? How do we even react? As it just goes to how powerful this movie is to watch. And this is gonna, a lot of war movies have been described this way, and I'm sure I've done it myself. But this movie is so realistic. It is so powerful. It just claws its way into your soul so easily, it seems like, just by not having any reservations about the horror. And indeed, it actually took them a long time to get this movie approved to be made because of censorship codes and everything. It took them upwards of 8 years to even get the thing made.
And it took them a while.
And even longer to get it released in certain countries. And it is so powerful. And it literally makes... I cannot think of another war movie that compares. I cannot imagine watching another one after this and thinking, oh, wow, this is horrifying. Like I love Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is one of my favorite movies ever, but it is just so not the same thing. It has such a different narrative approach that it seems almost childish by comparison. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, other movies seem that it makes other movies obvious for their artifice, and that is powerful. That is really powerful. That this movie can. It does not ruin other movies by any means, but man, just do not just watch this on a whim. Like, do not throw on Come and See. It'll take a lot out of you.
Yeah,
it seems like it did the same for you, Adonis.
Like you mentioned, it is one of the realest war movies or anti-war movies ever made. And you can definitely see that even before knowing any of the behind the scenes stuff. Like, you can definitely see that a lot of it was practical and a lot of it was not just special effects or stuff done in post. Like, the only one I can think of, like, I can't think of any movie to relate this to, but I know a lot of people will probably want to compare it to 1917 because that's a very recent war movie that also follows a young protagonist from sort of his point of view. He's already in the army when the movie starts, but he's in the World War, the first one, and we're kind of just following him throughout the entire movie. And he goes through some pretty horrendous things as well. Yeah, I think that movie is that's a tough one to watch, but nowhere near this one, because this one is just, I don't really know how to explain it, but it's just it's very in your face about it. Like, there's never a moment where you feel like, okay, maybe things will be okay. Maybe they'll be fine. as soon as he meets Glasha and the bombs come down, like you said, that's when it hits the fan, and it never stops hitting the fan from that point for this character. And it is rough, like really rough, not just for him, but for everyone around him, for this entire nation. And I mentioned earlier that last scene, I think, is probably one of the hardest to watch scenes. That I had to practically force myself not to turn it off because I wanted to get through the whole movie. But that is such a grueling and long scene. And you see every single detail of this horrendous event that's going on. And I'm trying hard not to spoil it too much. But it is just a crazy, crazy event. And it's essentially the Nazis coming in and invading this village, and you truly see the darkest side of humanity, and it's rough. I mean, I can't think. My vocabulary is not large enough to think of a word worse than rough, but that is rough. Does not begin to describe how terrible that scene was. But again, that's not to say that it isn't an important or a well done movie. I mean, practically it's done well, and I think it is a very important discussion to have. And I think if you weren't aware of the horrors of World War II and the terrible things that went on during it for these smaller nations, you'll definitely be aware by the end of this movie for sure.
I think the way that I would, if I were to describe this movie in sort of the effect it has, I would say it is a movie designed not to be forgotten. It's meant to be sort
Oh
of
yeah.
the definitive argument for why there's literally no reason for any war to exist. And I think not just because of all the horrific stuff in it, but also just the way that it's presented. It's realist, yes, but it's also, there's a lot of surrealism to it. There's, especially
Mm-hmm.
before all this stuff goes down in like those opening couple of scenes, there's this weird sort of low hum to everything that I did not pick up on the first time, or at least that I didn't remember. It's strange, and it doesn't feel like it definitely feel like this is going to be a different movie, but it also makes it feel like a nightmare right off the bat. The way it goes from just one atrocity to another without ever getting a moment, even in that brief happy moment where Fliora and Glasha are just, dancing in the woods or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That scene starts with them crying because of the horrific times that they're in. Like, there's no real moment of catharsis in this entire movie. Even like the second to last thing that happens, which I want to make sure that we get into the details of the ending a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
Even that almost has this vindication to it, but it's so hard to describe it without actually saying what happens. But it almost has this catharsis, but then also it never lets you forget that the cost of it is just, it's just too much by any stretch. It is way past any acceptable threshold. And yeah, you'll never forget it. It's been, before I rewatched this, it had been over 5 years since I've seen it, and I still remembered so much of it. There are about a half dozen shots in this movie that I will never forget as long as I live. There are like, people that have been burnt to a crisp. There's one of this sort of landscape shot with these flares going out over a landscape that's incredibly striking. And I could go on. What are some shots that really stuck out to you in this movie, Adonis?
Well, that is definitely one of them. I wanted to mention the scene where like the flare comes out and there's like these bullets just flying everywhere. That scene, definitely I will never forget. The ending scene, that entire 20-minute one that I keep bringing up, I think I can remember that in full detail because of just how striking it was. There is a scene where I believe, I don't think this is when he fully lost his innocence, but this is where I realized that there was no going back for Fleura. There's a scene where him and three other resistance fighters, they're looking for food and for rations, and two of them are lost due to a minefield, and it just happens so suddenly. It's out of nowhere. They're just talking, and then all of a sudden the explosion happens and they're gone. And it's such a sudden and shocking scene. And what really got me was immediately after that scene, Fiora and the surviving resistance fighter, makes a joke as they're getting down, and Fiora just starts laughing maniacally. And that was the moment for me where I realized that not necessarily the moment that completely broke him, because there is that final scene, which I believe really puts the nail in the coffin. But at that point, it became apparent that this was the norm for him. Like, he had already gone through so much up until that point. Not that he doesn't feel remorse, but that it's almost become like an expected thing. And that was extremely scary to me, because you see you see scenes earlier where, you know, he experiences death or experiences loss or tragedy, and it kind of like it takes a toll on him. But this scene here, like the I think what I'm trying to say is that the movie just keeps going, you know, like
Yeah.
it just moves along from that part, from that scene. And that, I don't know what that did to me, but I cannot stop thinking about that. And I think that's really what this movie does differently from other war or anti-war movies, is that there's, like you said, there's never a scene of catharsis. There's never a scene where you're like, okay, I can relax for a bit. Even when you do think you're going to get a scene where the characters are fine, a mine goes off, and you're like, oh my god, okay,
Yeah.
we are still in this, and that is, oh man, that, like just talking about it, it gives me chills. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
crazy to me.
I want to make sure that we give ourselves an opportunity to sort of talk in full detail about the last couple of things that happened in this movie. There are a couple of things I want to get to first, though. First off, Adonis, do you know the original title for this movie?
I do not. Was it not Come and See?
It was not Come and See. It was actually Kill Hitler, which is a title that I think it's a striking title. It would certainly get the attention of the average moviegoer, but I don't think it works for two reasons. One, they do not kill Hitler.
Right. Spoiler
Of
alert,
course.
that does not happen.
Yes, Hitler killed himself. But there's sort of the last thing in this movie is sort of, you could sort of see where that title might have come from. But also, I think that sounds almost like a weird Grindhouse movie, doesn't it? Just kill
It
Hitler.
does.
Like I don't think it would have prepared anyone in the way that like Come and See, that title is kind of perfect for this movie because it does not say anything specific about the plot, but it also implies this mysterious sort of almost taunting is the word that's coming to my mind, of saying like, there's evil in the world. This is it. We've got it right here. This is all that we'll ever need. So come and check it out. Do it at your own risk. That would be, if I could add a subtitle, it would be At Your Own Risk. But that might be a little
Come and
silly.
See At Your Own Risk.
Yeah. Secondly,
go ahead.
And actually I was doing a little bit of research, and I'm no scholar on this by any means, but actually Come and See is taken from a phrase in the Book of Revelations, which is what was said as each of the four horsemen of the apocalypse showed up in sort of the New Testament end of the world prophetic visions. I'm not a religious man, so I'm by no means an authority on this, but in the little bits of research I was able to do, I was like, yep, that's very fitting. And it's sort of the thing that was said just as the horsemen of death arrived and said that, I'm going to make sure I get this right. There was a pale horse, and the name it said on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And that kind of sums up the imagery of this movie perfectly. Just everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Everywhere they go. Just death and agony and pain and misery and horror. It's really quite fitting, I think.
Yeah, there is a lot of symbolism in this movie. Like you mentioned before, it is realistic but also very surreal as well. And there's like the obvious one to me was the plane flying over Fliora every so often, obviously meant to signal or symbolize death looming over him. But there's a lot more. I'd have to really think about it, or go or look up like what other symbols there were. But there was a lot of apocalyptic imagery in this movie that I think really was very, very fitting. It took an already tough piece of source material and just made it into something even rougher to grasp. I think even rougher to handle, because it was there's this the scene. God, I don't want to have to watch this movie again to remember it. But the point is, yes, there's a lot of apocalyptic imagery in the movie, and I think that title is very, very fitting because there is a lot of death, famine, war, obviously being the most obvious one that you see throughout Fliora's journey. So I feel like Kill Hitler would have been too like you said, too grindhouse and too revenge-ish, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that was really the point of Klimov's vision. I don't think he was trying to say, because it was anti-war. He said he's trying to say war is not good no matter what, and this is the cost of war. So I don't think it was too much like a he got what's coming to him kind of movie. I think it was just like, because really when you look at it, there is no winner at the end of this movie.
Nope.
Like, no, like none at all. Like, this is the cost of war, and this is what it does to people, and you really see that in Fliora's character. So I think Kill Hitler would have been a completely misguided title. So I'm glad they went with Come and See, because it definitely strikes that mystery and that illusion and that feeling of, wow, like this is how it was and how it is.
Incidentally, Kill Hitler would have been a great title for Inglourious Bastards if they had not been able to get that one. That wouldn't have been a bad approach, but I'm glad that we got the title we did. And the last thing, and this is really random, but I have to acknowledge it because it's just so weird to me. So on Letterboxd, which is where it's like sort of a social media website for cinephiles, if you don't know, for every movie they have the poster, but then they also have a cover image. It's like basically the equivalent of the profile picture and the cover photo on like Facebook or Twitter or something. And the poster for Come and See on Letterboxd is one of the various ones that's been throughout the years. It's a fine poster. The cover image is one of the most is just one of the poorest representations of this movie I've ever seen. It's this image of Fliora leaning up against a cow, which does happen in the movie in a really horrifying scene. But if you look at this picture by itself, it's got this really like angelic lighting to it. And he's sort of just looking up directly into the camera. It looks like it looks like an album cover from like 1998 or something of just this of just some one man band or something, and it's just so strange and it's so weird to me. And I'm not the first person to notice this, but yes, if that's all you see from this movie, just know that's a very poor representation.
Yeah,
of what
that is
you're
some
in for.
false advertising.
But yeah, and so Adonis, I think we've talked a lot sort of vaguely about the ending of this movie, but I think let's talk a little bit about the last couple of things that go on, because we've been sort of dodging around them this far. Okay, so just to recap, the Fliora's in the sort of insurgent separation in the woods. They get attacked. They're on the run. They go back to Fliora's village. And if you ask me, Sam, what is the most horrifying shot in cinema history, I might go with what happens in this scene, because Fliora and Galasha are looking for his family. They see the house has been completely abandoned and there are flies everywhere, but they're still like the stove is still working, or the oven, I guess, is still on. And you can tell there's sort of slowly getting just being filled with dread, but they're also trying to deny it. And so they're like, and Fliora says, wait a minute, I know where they are, starts running away from the village. Galasha starts following him. She turns around and sees, and this shot lasts just 3 seconds. It is not long at all. And sees just bodies, just dozens of them, of corpses laying there, dead. They've been massacred.
Yeah.
And that's all we see. Just lasts for 3 seconds and then goes back to it. And she says nothing to him until later. And just this shock of that. Like, the movie's been scary up to this point, but it's really that shot that really lets you know, like, this is the end of the world. Like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And there's no going back after that. And man, that's one of the ones. That if you said, Sam, what's the most horrifying one in history? That's it right there, I think.
Oh yeah, there's the scene immediately after that when he finds that group of people out in the plains. You see the old man from the beginning who warns him and that other kid not to dig, and there's just, oh god, that for me is a very hard scene to watch too.
Yeah. We see this guy has been burnt to a crisp and is laying there begging everyone, stop. Enough. Yeah. The world is horrifying enough. And it's worth noting, I meant to bring this up earlier, but when they're digging through the trenches at the very beginning of this movie, I think it's very telling that they're literally sifting through the wreckage of the previous war. It was in the 1910s, World War I was not called World War One. It was just called the Great War. They thought it would be the last one. Certainly we'll never do this again. Here they are sifting back through it, finding the rubble from it, and just repeating history again. We see this time and time again. So I think it's very, very telling that that's the first thing that happens in the movie.
There's a poster that I really like that I saw when looking up I think it's on the Wikipedia page. I was looking up this movie, and it's of Flora. It's sort of like a comic booky type poster done like an 80s like a very anti-war propaganda poster. And half of his face is how you see him at the beginning of the movie, like he's smiling and he's got his hair, it's brown, and then the top right corner of his face, his hair is gray and his eyes are red and there's like dirt and blood all over him. And that I think is also a really good poster to indicate like what the movie's about. It reminds me of like these two scenes, like at the beginning of the movie where he's taking a picture with the resistance force, and he looks very happy, like he's got his gun. And then contrast that with the end where he's getting his picture taken again, and it's the exact opposite in all sense.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, because this is the horrific scene in the village that Adonis has mentioned a couple times. So they eventually make their way to this other village that is in the process of being massacred. And oh gosh, this is going to be hard to describe. The invading Nazis gather everyone into what looks to be an abandoned church, or maybe just some large building for gathering. And they get everyone in there, they lock the doors, and Fliora manages to climb out of the church, like no one else does. And they set fire to the church, burn it to the ground. Jesus.
Yeah. They do a lot more than that. It's horrifying how much they do to that church for those people in there. And I'm not gonna describe everything they do, because it's just it's bad, but it is just the most evil display of human darkness I've ever seen in a movie. I mean, I am not exaggerating when I say that scene has stuck with me since I've seen it, and will probably stick with me. And I think if anyone asks me, hey, should I watch Come and See? I'll say, I have to tell you, like, you're going to experience something in the last 20 or so minutes that's going to be very hard, very, very hard to watch. So yeah, it's rough.
And then the scene with the photograph that we described, that's exactly what happens, is that a couple of the SS officers, they go up, they grab Fliora, they point a gun at his head, and they're just standing there, and someone takes a picture of it and is like, all right, that'll be one for the books. And then they walk away, just leave him there.
Right.
Leave him with that for the rest of his life. And man, that must have been traumatizing, especially knowing that they used live ammunition. I would not be surprised at all if that gun was loaded.
Yeah, knowing that now, geez.
Mm-hmm. It's not easy to watch. It's not an easy movie to get through. And so finally, we skipped a couple of things, but the very last thing that happens is the resistance fighters, they have captured some of the Nazis. As a matter of fact, the ones that we just saw burning down that church, we see a couple of them. They've got them captured under a bridge with guns trained on them and everything. And all of them are just saying like, okay, we've been captured. But then there's just one of them that just has all this fanaticism and is saying like, yes, this is our God-given right, or something like that, to extinguish all of those who don't belong. Obviously, it's just pure evil. And so the resistance fighters start pouring gasoline on all of the Nazis and are about to light them on fire when suddenly someone gets impatient and just guns them all down.
All right.
Goes to show that there's no one, like, I shouldn't say there's no victims in this. There's no right side to be on, because obviously the Nazis are the ones who are committing genocide, but it just goes to show that there are no innocents left after, like, there's no innocent side. Not everyone's guilty, but no one is innocent.
Right.
Then what we see is there's this framed picture of Hitler in this little puddle that says, I think it says Hitler the Liberator or something like that. And Fleur
Yeah.
just grabs his rifle that he's had for the whole movie and just starts shooting at the framed picture. And what we see is actual footage, like archival footage of atrocities taking place in reverse. So it's as if it's replaying history in that just brief moment of saying, what if we could just go back? Like, what if none of this had ever happened? But then finally, eventually, we see the archival footage goes all the way back and we see a picture of Hitler as an infant. And Fleur stops and does not and just stops shooting the picture and eventually catches up with the rest of the resistance who are running into the woods. Movie ends. And it's just this perfect button on the story of saying, we can never go back. What is done cannot be undone. Literally, even beyond death, which obviously is irreversible, but just everything else, the torture, the famine, the hunger, the war, the lives that will never be the same again. That's all gone, done for eternity. There's none of it left.
Right.
And it's just this remarkable ending on what was already one of the most effective movies of all time. And I think if I had to give my final thought, I would say that Come and See is not the best war movie, if you know what and what I mean by that is that I think there are other war movies that I prefer because I think they work better cinematically. They have, they're more interesting to watch. I know it feels weird giving all the praise that I've given Come and See, but that's still one of the very best. But just as a movie, it might not be the best cinematically, but it's the only war movie that matters. If there was only one that I would say keep and get rid of the rest of them for eternity, it would be this one. I think this is the one. I think Elem Klimov was right when saying that when deciding I've said everything I need to say, that's it. Goodbye, cinema. I've said my piece. I think this is one hell of a way to go out. I want to say, Adonis, did you have anything else that you wanted to bring up? And then if not, what are your final thoughts on Come and See?
Yeah, I would say that I agree, like 100%. This is one of the most, if not the most important movie of all time. I think that this movie, it might not be, it's definitely not, I don't know why I'm trying to say maybe. It's definitely not an easy watch. It's in fact a very, very hard watch, but I think that it is important to watch, especially with the way that history repeats itself, with the way we view war. I think Klimov definitely, I think he hit the nail right on the head. I think that he opened it for discussion, and I think that as hard as it was to watch, I wouldn't have had it any other way. Because I think if Come and See was just your standard Hollywood anti-war movie, right, it wouldn't have been as influential and it wouldn't have opened a lot of eyes. Like I certainly didn't know about the invasions of Belorussia, and I didn't know how absolutely horrendous they were until I saw this movie. And even though it was tough for me to watch, I'm glad that I did watch it at least once, just so I could see, so I could come and see what had happened. Yeah, I think that's really it. Like I said earlier, I think it's a really well made movie as well. I'm a sucker for POV shots if they're done right. Yeah. And I think that this movie did a lot of really good POV shots.
A lot of great steady cam work in this too.
Oh yeah. There's I don't know if this is true because I haven't looked at any of the behind the scenes stuff quite yet, but I know there are a couple scenes where it looks as if the actors themselves are holding the camera, or at the very least have them very close. Like there's one scene where they're like stealing a cow, and the way it's tracked, it kind of feels like the cameraman is at least like right there with the actors for the filming of that. And I thought that was a very interesting shot choice to make, which I appreciated. So I think it is a technically well-made movie. It is definitely not the best war movie out in cinema. That's for me. That still goes to 1917. I absolutely adore that movie. But I think that this is a very important movie to watch, and I think I would recommend it to a lot of people with heavy disclaimers if they wanted to know about history.
If everyone were to watch this, like if it just became sort of a rite of passage, like at one point or
Right.
another, everyone's got to everyone's got to come and see. Theoretically, everyone's got to watch, come and see. I think that it would be depressing, yes, but also I have to imagine that we might be better off as a species. Like if everyone were to watch this at one point on an individual basis, yes, we would be horrified, but also just having those images there, I think it could do some good. But of course, that's only wishful thinking. And that brings us to the recommendation for come and see. So I decided before doing this episode that I racked my brain thinking what could possibly compare. And this might be disappointing to some, but for the first time in Extra Milestone history, I got nothing. I couldn't come up with anything to recommend to this. But Adonis texted me last night and said, Sam, what about this? And I said, Adonis, you're a genius. I think you may have figured it out. So Adonis, take it away by all means.
All right. Full disclaimer, I don't believe that this movie has the same effect that Come and See had on me. It's like Sam said, it's very, very hard. So I don't blame him at all for not being able to find anything to remotely compare this to, or even say it's similar to, because there truly is no movie like Come and See. Mm-hmm. But I was racking my brain as well. I was like, okay, what am I going to say? I don't want to say this. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say Schindler's List because that's the one that's on everyone's mind. Everyone's seen Schindler's List, you know?
Schindler's List is the only one I could possibly think of that even comes close. But even then, it's kind of obvious. And also, combined, those two movies are like 6 hours long. So that's 6 hours of just human misery. So I could not, in good conscience, recommend that to go along with it.
But if you want a really good-looking animated movie that also talks about the atrocities of war and just the misery of humankind.
It's World War II also, right?
Yeah, it is also World War II, so it fits. Then I would recommend, I believe it's 1988, Grave of the Fireflies from good old Studio Ghibli and Mr. Miyazaki. Although actually I think it was Takahata who made this one, who I think is like a colleague of his.
I know that Miyazaki didn't direct it.
Yeah. But yeah, Grave of the Fireflies, if you've never seen it, it's a beautiful movie. I am a sucker for Ghibli movies. I love the art style that they choose for every one of them. And Grave of the Fireflies is no exception. It is beautiful from the beginning scene to the very end. It is just a visually striking movie, but it's also really, really sad. I mean, it starts off with the bombing of Nagasaki. And I know it's actually a little harder because it's an animated movie from Studio Ghibli, so you might expect it to be, a fun little romp for the family. No, definitely not. This movie does not sugarcoat or shy away from how horrible that event was. But I love it because it tells that story from the point of view of the Japanese people, from their perspective, rather than a lot of movies we get from. And this is also why I like Come and See, because we get it from another perspective. A lot of the times we get these movies from America's point of view. And so the movie does not shy away from how horrendous that event was for them. But it's also a very, very, like I said, visually striking movie. It will leave you pretty sad at the end. I've seen this movie a couple times. It did not leave me as just drained as Come and See did, but it's definitely a very similar feeling evoked. So that's my recommendation. Grave of the Fireflies. Maybe don't watch them on the same day, Give
I was
going to
say. Uh-huh. Yeah, it was. I just to make it clear, it is Isao Takahata.
Isao Takahata. So, okay.
Behold, everyone! Thank you, Adonis, for coming up with the only movie that could possibly compare.
You're welcome.
Oh yes. Okay, Adonis. What do you say we talk about, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the most different movie of all time?
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
We need a little bit of a palate cleanser. We've been through the atrocities of humankind. What say we talk about one of the most exciting and feel-good movies of all time?
I say, rev your engines and let's get traveling. Time traveling.
Let's go back to the future.
Steven Spielberg presents Back to the Future, a Robert Zemeckis film. Marty leads an ordinary life.
No McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. Well, history is going to change.
And 1985 is not his year. But Dr. Brown is about to change all that.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
He's sending Marty 30 years back in time.
It's a flying saucer from outer space!
Now, he's trapped in the past.
It's got to be a dream.
About to meet
chocolate.
His future father.
He's a peeping Tom. Wow!
And he's making an impression on his mother.
He's an absolute dream. And he can sleep in my room.
You know Back to the Future. I don't even need to explain what it is. It is Robert Zemeckis, 1985, also 1985, July to be exact, is when both of these movies were released. And it is the story of Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, who goes back in time using a time-traveling DeLorean built by Dr. Emmett Brown, played by Christopher Lloyd, and accidentally prevents his parents from falling in love and has to bend over backwards and do all this crazy stuff in the far off year of 1955 to make everything the way it was. And it is one of the most exciting movies of all time. That's one of the things I always forget in between viewings of this movie. And it's actually been a long time since I last saw this. It's been almost as long as it's been since I first watched Come and See, coincidentally enough, almost 5 years. And I was immediately reminded of not only the excitement of this movie because it involves time travel and this one person's own destiny and everything, but also just the attention to detail, the way that every little thing just has some sort of payoff to it. Like every little signpost, every plot point, that all comes back by the end of the movie. And it is remarkably well structured. And as a matter of fact, I had never seen either of the sequels, the two second parts of the trilogy.
Oh man.
I watched all three of them in a row the other night. And
great.
I was amazed at how efficiently told it was for a story involving so many different parallel timelines and realities and versions of characters from different eras and whatnot. I was amazed at how easy it was to follow. Robert Zemeckis is one hell of a storyteller when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I was delighted to go back to it. It was just as good as I remembered. Adonis, I'm curious, not only if you rewatched it, what your reactions were this time. How did your connection to Back to the Future start? Because I remember when I brought up this episode, you were very excited to talk about it. How far back does this go exactly?
Oh man. Okay. So first off, I did not watch Back to the Future, rewatch it at least, but I've seen it a lot. So I think I'm fully confident that I remember most, if not all, of how the movie goes. Let's go back in time to 2000 and I want to say it's 2005 or 6.
Wow.
So we're going back.
That is a long time. That is a long time ago.
Oh yeah. I'm about 8 or 9 years old, right? I'm enjoying my youth, not too many responsibilities, not too many hardships. Don't have to worry about taxes or rent quite yet. Don't have to get a job. The most I have to worry about is whether or not I wake up in time to watch ABC Kids and Disney Channel early in the morning so I can get my daily fix or my weekly fix of Saturday morning cartoons. That is the biggest thing stressing me out as a child. Waking up just an hour late and missing He-Man or Power Rangers and going, God damn it, I have to wait another 7 days before I can watch this again.
He-Man. Yeah.
So I'll travel back in time to that era. My mom and dad, thankfully, are big nostalgia nuts, just like me. They loved the stuff they had as a kid. And they loved the stuff that sort of, they didn't love the stuff I had as much, but they still loved it. So they liked to watch cartoons with me, and I would watch Boomerang with my dad all the time. But what I would do with them a lot is I would watch VHS tapes. We had and I still have them all in my garage, 3 or 4 boxes full of VHS tapes and an old VCR that I am shocked beyond belief still works to this day.
They built that technology to last. It's remarkable how many stories I hear of stuff that's that old and still works.
Isn't it crazy? Like, that'll work for years, and someone will be like, oh man, my new Blu-ray player, I accidentally breathed on it wrong, and now I have to get it replaced.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Whatever happened to building technology that would last instead of sabotaging it?
Right, exactly.
So that it would break within days.
The red rings of death and all that. But yeah, so I would watch a lot of these movies with my dad, and one of the movies we had on VHS was Back to the Future. And my dad loves this movie. So a little bit of a backstory about my dad. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. My dad is from a different country. He learned English watching sitcoms and movies. He would watch, or rather he practices English that way. He would watch Friends and Happy Days, and he would watch Back to the Future. And so there's a bunch of pictures of my dad with like the Fonz haircut and a leather jacket. My favorite one is us at Disneyland, where he's just next to Winnie the Pooh doing like the hey, like the pose. And I'm like, oh, geez, Dad. So we would watch that movie a lot as I was growing up, because it was one of his favorite movies and it quickly became one of mine. And we actually got to see it in theaters a couple of times, because it would always have that like Tuesday night re-release classic movie thing that like Harkins would do for like $7, come see an old movie. So I got to see it on the big screen with my dad, I think twice at least. And it's one of my favorite time travel movies, one of my favorite sci-fi movies, besides like Alien, like the obvious ones. Sorry. So that's my history with the movie. I've only seen like the sequels. I think I've seen the second one a handful of times. I think I've only seen the third one like once or twice. I have not seen the other ones as much as I've seen the first one, but I still love the trilogy as a whole. I agree with you completely. Zemeckis is really good at keeping the story consistent and like cognitive. To the point where even though like people have been picking these movies apart for years, there are a lot of plot holes in them. It's still a very well done time travel movie, and I think a lot of people still discuss how much it got right versus how much it got wrong, and how well it plays in its own time travel playing field. You know,
it's interesting what you say about the plot holes, because I think they're there, but also I don't think it's anything that the filmmakers and storytellers weren't aware of. We've talked about time travel and the way that in Back to the Future, it's a version of time travel that's actually scientifically does not hold any water whatsoever. That, like, you know, if you go back and change something, that it could theoretically be changed back to exactly the way it was, or that time is this constant flow. Like that just does not make as much sense as, say, for instance, the first Terminator, which employs what I've been told is called a time loop, where, you know, nothing is altered, but also time travel is still involved. I'm not an expert on this by any means, so I'm sure I'm doing a horrific job explaining it, but that's basically the idea. But also, I think, especially watching all three of them, like just sort of marathoning them the way I did, it's very clear to see that they understand that and are saying, like, yeah, we know it doesn't make sense, but it's a movie. What do you want from us? These are our rules.
Right.
These are our rules, and they stick to them, and they commit to them and everything. And for that reason, if you're willing to buy into the rules, which is not that hard, unless you're the scientific inaccuracies or whatever, if it's that distracting, that's probably the only way I can see someone not getting wrapped up into this. Because if you buy into the rules, it really gets across just how intense this must be to go back in time and to realize, oh, I just stopped myself from being born.
Right.
And I have like this limited window to get that reality back, you know? And they really sell just the impossibility of that across all three movies. We're not talking about the sequel, but it's kind of the same. It's essentially the same movie three times, just with different details. And that's what makes them all different. And that's what makes them all great. I really like the trilogy as a whole. But if we're just talking about the first one, it sells this tension, this ticking clock. To quote Marty McFly, it sells the heaviness of everything that's going on.
That's heavy, Doc.
To the point where there's that word again, heavy. What is wrong with the gravity of the future? I forget what it is. My Christopher Lloyd impression is not up to par. Anyway, to the point where when it finally works out, to when one of my favorite moments in movie history finally occurs, when they're at the enchantment under the sea dance, and what's his name? George and Lorraine are about to kiss for the first time at the dance, and then for whatever reason, it's one of my favorite things, that redheaded guy with the braces comes up and is like, scram, dude. Like, I love how that guy almost completely disrupts the timeline. But then George says, not on my watch. And doesn't he punch the guy?
Yeah, he's like, George is, watch, and then hits him, and like Crispin Glover does a little like handshake thing.
Yeah,
like, oh,
yeah. George really discovered his excitement with punching people in the face, I guess, after he does it to Biff. But yeah, and then when that finally happens, and they kiss under the lights, and then Marty, who's just about to fade into eternity, like perks up again and keeps playing the guitar. I'm getting chills just describing it now. When that moment happens, we're just as relieved, and we feel just as much catharsis as Marty does in that moment, because everything is back to normal. And the weirdest thing is, and I had completely forgotten about this, but that moment happens, I look at the clock, there's like 30 minutes left in the movie. It's remarkable how it sort of peaks right there, and then you would think it would peter out after that, but no, it's still just as exciting when we get to that final act of driving the DeLorean over under those street lights just as the lightning strikes, and how everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong. It maintains the tension all throughout, even when it looks like everything's been saved. And it is just a remarkable feat of storytelling, to the point where I wish I discovered it earlier. I did not first watch this movie until I was like 12 or 13 years old. It just never came into my life. And it's just, I realized with this rewatch, like, man, I have been missing out, because this thing is really special.
You mentioned the, like how vibrant and energetic the movie is. I love the scene that starts it all, when they're in the DeLorean and they're driving, and there's that sense of like, oh, what if this doesn't work? Right. Because like you don't know if it's going to work or not until it does. And you can see the fear on Marty's face as they're picking up speed, and you're like, oh geez, okay, it kind of looks like this is a botched experiment. And then they just like that. It's such an iconic scene for a reason, right? Like, they go back in time, and there's like the flames and on the tire tracks left behind them, and they come back, and they're in a completely different time in the past, right? Like, looking back on that scene, seeing that as a kid, I was like stunned, like, wow, that's so cool, just imagine like a little me with like humongous glasses. I've had glasses since I was 3 years old, so I've always had the big oculars, just going, wow, that was awesome. And even watching it time and time after that scene has never failed to amaze me, because like you really feel the same amount of energy that the actors put into the movie, into their scenes.
And there's something I want to sort of get into a little bit of detail on that scene, which is where they're in, it's like, what is it, 1 something in the morning. They're in the parking lot of the Twin Pines Mall at first, later the Lone Pine Mall. And they're testing out the thing. They figure out that it works. Einstein traveled 1 minute into the future, and to him it feels like nothing happened. And it's so soon into the movie that we're actually in Marty's shoes when that happens, because we're just learning about this time machine. We hear it's like Doc Brown is just this crazy guy who's been working on this forever, as it turns out, for 30 years, as we learn. Marty's only just finding out about it. Then suddenly, within 10 minutes, he's 30 years in the past. Like, imagine the shock of that. It's remarkable that he was able to maintain his senses and everything. Granted, it's a movie, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Like he adapts to it remarkably well. And then, of course, when the Libyan national bus shows up, I love that it's just a Volkswagen bus that they have. Like, it's nothing official. That's just what they have. That's a weird plot point. I gotta say, I will never be able to watch this movie the same way again after hearing John Mulaney's bit about how weird of a movie this is. That it's just that the premise, without even getting into like what happens, is that there's this 17-year-old high school kid whose best friend is a disgraced nuclear scientist. I will never be able to look at it the same way again. So that is strange if you really think about it. But
and we're gonna call it Back to the Future.
Like, literally nothing about it actually makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my. But yeah, and the thing that I really took notice of with this rewatch of it is the way that, how should I say this? The way that the scenes at the beginning and the end that take place in 1985, they're sort of really deliberately 80s-ish. You know what I'm saying? Like, they really go out of their way to establish this is what makes the 80s the 80s. We got this kid who's listening to like Huey Lewis in the news and stuff. And then I love that the car is a DeLorean, because the way I understand it is that the DeLorean was sort of like kind of a joke. You know what I'm saying? That it was just this short-lived design of this car that was supposed to be like the next big scientific innovation. Like, you know, it's got the doors that swing up and everything. And I guess the material that it was made out of was different than a lot of other cars. And evidently it was just not all that it cracked itself up to be. So it was kind of a punchline. But single-handedly, because of the Back to the Future trilogy, it's remained in the consciousness, and to the point where I don't know how true this is, but I read a statistic that said about 9,000 DeLoreans were manufactured, and about 6,000 of those are still on the road. Like, they're kind of a artifact at this point. So many of them have survived for that reason.
Well, I imagine
and what I love is that when
I was going to say, I imagine the movie definitely skyrocketed the sales of DeLoreans a little bit after it came out.
And resulted in a lot of disappointed car purchasers when they found out that as a car, actually not great. That's just what I've heard. But what I love about that is that when we see the contrast with that, when Marty goes back to the 1950s and sees that things are more or less the same, it's just the details that are different. Like, life on a day-to-day basis really doesn't change that much across history, especially not just 30 years, to the point where when they made Back to the Future 2 and they go forward 30 years to 2015, they really, really overestimated just how radically different things would be. And of course, that might be part of the joke, is they said, let's just go way off the rails and say that like Jaws 19 is out and there's going to be hoverboards. I actually don't know what their idea for that was, but you think about, like, we're in the year 2020 right now, and imagine the year 2050. We like to think that there's going to be all these huge technological innovations and stuff, and things are going to be unrecognizable from today. It'll probably be more or less the same. Of course, there's no way to know for sure, but if history is any indication, it's not going to be as radically different.
I mean, when you think about it, the way that advancements in technology and culture works, it's never really how the movies put it, where like you'll go 20 years in the future and all of a sudden everything is drastically different. Because I mean, if you think about it, Sam, you and I were alive for like every incarnation of like the iPhone, right? And we look at the iPhone 11 right now, and then you look at the first iPhone, and you're like, wow, these are two completely different devices. But it wasn't just like, you know, the iPhone 11 came out like immediately, right? There was the one through, I don't know if the iPhone has gone through every number in numerical order, but yeah. So it's like it takes time, and like you can see the steps towards that advancement. So like, I'm sure in like 2050 we'll have something pretty cool, but we would have had like the beta version of that in 2030 or something, you know?
But also, again, like I said, just the actual function of life probably going to look pretty similar to the way it is now. And I love the way that Marty sort of gets to empathize with his parents as a result of that and finds out like, we really are just our parents 30 years later. You know what I'm saying? Like it's really not as stark of a divide, generally speaking. Of course, there are a lot of things that make every generation different, but I think that's kind of part of what this movie is getting at least, about the way that we interact with different generations, and how if we were to be able to do this, if we were to be able to go back in time and see what things were like when they were our age, whatever age you happen to be, we can really, I think we could really get along with other generations if that were the case. And there's so much about this movie, but Adonis, I have a question that I want to ask you. So Marty McFly saves his own life. We see him and his brother and sister come back to life in the photograph. And then he decides, okay, I've got a little spare time. I'm going to play Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. I want to really wow these people. And I want to talk about the ramifications of that in a second. But first, I want to ask you, if you're in this exact same situation, I don't know if you play guitar, but let's say you do.
Oh, I do.
Oh, very nice, very nice. So, and you're going to play a song from now to amaze someone in, let's say, the year 1990. What are you going to play? What's going to really blow their minds? I'm curious.
Oh, geez. Okay. I am not prepared for this. 1990. Okay.
I know.
So I'm Marty McFly in this generation. We've gone back to 1990. I've just saved my own life, and I'm just so happy that I just have to express it in song.
Yeah.
Whoa, is that a guitar I see? Well, don't mind if I do. Pass me the strings, King, I say to the guy next to the guitar. What? He says. Never mind. I run over and I grab the electric guitar. I plug it up to the amp, and I'm playing. That was an entire stall method that didn't work because I've yet to come up with the song.
There you go.
Man. Geez. Okay. I listen to a lot of my music taste has definitely opened wide recently. I grew up listening to a lot of the folks would call it emo rock music.
Okay.
A lot of Linkin Park, a lot of Panic at the Disco. But recently I've gotten into pop, country, electronic. So what's something that would really just freak out the people of the 90s? I'm thinking like, oh man, and it's got to have a guitar in it too, or at the very least be able to play. Not necessarily.
It can be anything. I'm just curious. What is your first inclination to go with?
I would probably play something by something by Lady Gaga or something, right? Something very, because I want to wow this crowd, right? I want them to hear music that they haven't really heard before. Although I guess she's very Madonna-like in nature. Oh, this is a tough one. This is a very tough one, Sam. What would you play? And let me think about this for a second.
I also had a lot of trouble thinking about what I would do, because most of my favorite music came out before the 90s, so they would know it. It would make no difference. They'd think, oh, Sam's just playing American Pie. Sure, we know that song. Wow, is he really going to do all 8 minutes? I guess so. That would probably be my first inclination, because that's one of my top 3 favorite songs. But it's interesting the way we look at music. This is another thing that relates to Back to the Future. We like to I've heard a lot of sentiments expressed to the effect of music just isn't as good as it used to be. And I think part of that might be true, but I also think the other part of that is that music of the past gets filtered down, like when we think about the music of today, we're getting all of it. We're getting the good and the bad. We're getting the timeless stuff that will be played for generations, but also the stuff that is really just for the moment and is going to be, is going to go viral for a year and then will fade into eternity. Like, when was the last time you heard anyone listen to Call Me Maybe casually? That was just a thing of the moment. I would imagine that if we went back to whatever era, we would get a lot of the same things. We would hear the classics that we know from the future, but also a lot of random stuff that's disappeared completely. So when it comes to trying to sift through just all the stuff that's out now, it's hard to come up with something that would really wow them. But if it's the year 1990, it's hard to go wrong with a little Green Day. You know, I think that might be my first inclination, partly because I do a Billy Joe Armstrong impression, so I would at least be able to do it, you know, some amount of justice. So that's probably what I'm going with.
Oh, I've got it.
What?
You're going to really hate my
You're going to play Everything is Awesome from the Lego Movie.
No. That's a good one. Oh, I can't believe I didn't think of that. No, I'm sticking with this one. Okay. I'm playing in its entirety from the band Simple Plan, the What's New Scooby-Doo theme song. Because think about it, right? They know Scooby-Doo.
I thought you might, yeah.
It's the 90s. They know Scooby-Doo, but they don't have What's New Scooby-Doo. Just that's a decade. At least a decade and some change before they get that one. All they have right now is like, Where Are You, Scooby-Doo, and A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, and the new Scooby-Doo movies. So I start playing, and it's perfect because it starts off immediately with no mystery as to who the song is about, who the central focus of the song is. Because it starts off with, Who wants to Scooby-Doo? We're coming after you. We're gonna solve that mystery. And I just can't wait to see all of their faces because like the shock will kick in a little bit after the first lyric, right? Like they'll hear, oh, what's this Scooby-Doo? And then I'll keep going and they'll go, hold on, did he say Scooby-Doo?
Yeah.
Like the dog, right? The mystery solving dog. What is he? Why did he write a song about? Is he that curious about what Scooby-Doo's been up to in the past decade? And I'd like to think that I would create a time loop of myself, and Simple Plan would hear that song and go, oh man, yeah, we got to get on this.
Not unlike exactly what happens in Back to the Future with Marvin Berry.
Right.
Okay, there are two more things I want to talk about with Back to the Future, and that's one of them. So obviously it's an iconic moment of Marty McFly singing Johnny Be Good, but it's also been noted, and rightly so, that's kind of blatantly appropriating Chuck Berry. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like the implication is not only that Johnny Be Good was originally written by a white man, by Marty McFly, but also that Chuck Berry heard it and just plagiarized it.
Right.
Like that he would just stoop that low just to get that new sound he's looking for. So it's really, I would be curious to hear I imagine the filmmakers were just thinking that it would be a fun time travel gag, but also there's this side of it that's like, okay, that's, you know, that's a thing you did. So whatever.
I know it was a harmless scene, and someone there just thought, oh, that's a fun song we could do to really not in the movie because there's more, but to like just bring the movie to a high note. But you also got to wonder, like, how is there nobody on like during filmmaking that went, maybe not that one, right? Like we could do any other song, guys. There's so many to pull from. Why not choose a song from someone people don't like? You know, why not choose a song from Bono? Right?
There you go.
Then we won't feel bad when it's like, oh, Bono stole I Will Follow or something. I don't know a lot of U2 songs.
Yeah, there you go.
Cedarwood Road or something, right?
Or like Dave Matthews or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You know?
Actually, yeah, I don't think Dave Matthews was active in 1985, but that basic idea, you know?
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would love to. It would be weird to know that there was a bunch of alternate versions of that scene where Marty McFly sang a different song, and none of them just had that zazz to it, you know?
Right. There's a version where he's doing Hallelujah, the Leonard Cohen version.
Yeah. I love it.
There was a secret code.
Or hell, it's 1955. Do the Beatles, Marty.
Right?
It's right.
I'm sure.
We're getting hung up on the thing. Yeah. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is the one. There's a couple of major characters, but the one that we haven't talked about yet is the villain, is Biff Tannen, who's one of the most despicable villains. One of the villains, there's a lot of villains out there that people say they're effective because you love to hate them. That's the phrase I've heard a lot. With Biff, I hate to hate Biff. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing lovable about Biff whatsoever. And that's why I think it's so effective, is that we see this guy, like different versions of him throughout time and history, is the main villain throughout the entire trilogy. And Thomas, is it Thomas F. Wilson or J. Wilson? I actually don't remember. Thomas Wilson, let's just say, is the actor who plays, I am losing the middle initial, but regardless, Thomas Wilson plays Biff throughout the years and has this remarkable ability of being just hateable. You know what I'm saying? Like there's just something about this type of person that Thomas Wilson is able to channel almost too effectively, that every single time we see Biff's plan get foiled is really effective, especially in Back to the Future 2, where we actually see an alternate timeline where he literally rules the world. And it's one of the scariest things ever, especially because, I don't know if you knew this, Adonis, did you know that Biff was literally based off of our current president, whose name I cannot even stand to say?
I did know that. And that is one of the most terrifying facts I had ever learned.
And so watching Back to the Future 2, that's almost too close to home. Like I was trying to have fun during that movie. I was actually more horrified than anything watching Back to the Future 2. So
it's the same thing with Home Alone 2. That one scene that everyone always brings up.
Yeah,
that you just can't get through anymore.
Oh well, yeah. It's a hell of a time. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure I give a shout out to Thomas Wilson for doing such a great job of being just completely contemptible. So I don't know. Do you feel the same way about that? It's fun. You hate to hate Biff Tannen.
Oh, 100%. There's like, especially when I was watching it as a kid, I would always be like, why don't they just punch Biff, right? And they did. So good on that. But it's very similar to what's his name? I always forget his name, from Karate Kid. The main character for Cobra Kai now, which I have not seen yet. John has been telling me to check it out. And pretty much everyone's been telling me to check it out. So I really, really want to already. So I'm probably going to watch it on Netflix at some point very soon. But it's the same thing, right? Like this guy who you just cannot stand. It's almost like a release of energy, right? When you see this guy and you just like have all of this one central focus point to just beamline all of your hateful energy towards, right?
Yeah.
And I think he does it very effectively. Like I think there's like a moment in the second one where they try to make you feel compassionate for Biff. And for a second, I'm like, I'm sure he's had like a rough life, but at the same time, no, he's a terrible person. Yeah. And Thomas Wilson is great at doing it in all three movies. So kudos to Thomas Wilson. I'm sure you're a really great guy in real life. And I hope that you don't get like hate mail and stuff. Like, did you know Tom Felton, who played Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter, got a lot of hate mail and even dirty looks walking down the street when those movies were first coming out, because he was so good at playing the villain that people were like, oh, he's such a bad guy. But now he's done like a lot of interviews. People really like him. He's done other stuff like the other members of the cast to like separate himself from the movies.
I guess some people don't understand the concept of acting, but
yeah, right.
Only so much you can do. And yeah, I think it's part of what makes the ultimate victory at the end of Back to the Future so satisfying, because the idea of failure, of letting this person win, it's actually horrifying. It's not just we understand that they're the villain and therefore we want them to lose. It's like we're actually rooting against this person. And I miss the days when like movie villains would have just this cabal of cronies that would follow them everywhere. I love the guy who's just wearing the 3D glasses, like the blue and red 3D glasses for no reason. Also, Billy Zane is one of those guys.
Is he?
Did you know that? I did not even notice that until the end credits. And then I rewound it. I'm like, there he is. There's Billy Zane. He was there the whole time. Oh, man, I did not know that. I'm going to have to rewatch that. So I've said pretty much everything I want to say. Adonis, did you have any final thoughts that you want to give about Back to the Future? No, I think we pretty much covered it. Okay. One last thing before our recommendations is I want to make sure to give a shout out to Ron Cobb, the designer of Back to the Future, and actually a bunch of the most iconic movies of all time, was sort of behind a lot of the aesthetic of these movies that we know so intimately now. Ron Cobb just passed away actually 3 days ago, just by sheer coincidence. So I just want to say rest in peace, Ron Cobb, and thank you for all of your work on all these great movies like Dark Star, Alien, Star Wars, Conan the Barbarian. The list goes on. So
Oh, yeah.
Definitely check out any of those movies that you haven't seen. Adonis, did you have, this is another one, it was nearly impossible to come up with a recommendation for, but did you have a movie that you think might parallel in some way or another with Back to the Future that you would recommend the listeners watch?
I don't know if it parallels too well. I was thinking about this a lot. Even when I texted you last night, I actually ended up switching my movie again a couple of times. I went through a lot of them. I went through like Bill and Ted, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, which was going to be my one for a while, but I think that one's too similar to Back to the Future. It doesn't really parallel it too much.
It can be similar. It's just whatever criteria you feel like applying.
Okay. I eventually settled on Looper.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very different approach to the time travel idea.
Yeah, right. I wanted to find one that was similar, like a similar concept, but a very different approach to it. I think it's a really good example of Hayden Christensen. A lot of people after the Star Wars movie said he can't act very well. I disagree. I think he's a decent actor. I think Looper shows that he can act.
Is Hayden Christensen in Looper?
Oh yeah, he is. Oh really? No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Jumper.
Okay. I got my streams crossed. Hold up. Did I miss Hayden Christensen?
I got my streams crossed entirely.
Oh my, never crossed the streams, Adonis.
No, I think I'll stick with Looper though. It's like more of a
it's grittier.
Yes, thank you, grittier. It's a much grittier movie. It definitely has a grittier approach to time travel, which I think is like a great little switch up after seeing Back to the Future.
It's sort of dealing with what the actual real life implications might actually be if time travel were a thing, sort of the apocalyptic nature of it and how it's sort of been usurped for just business purposes,
If Doc Brown wasn't a fun, lovable, failed nuclear scientist and instead was like a gritty Bruce Willis type of doom impending guy, and Marty McFly was just Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I think you would have Looper.
Adonis, I have a confession to make. I don't really like Looper that much, but I'm glad that you do. So yes,
that's okay. You know what? Like I said, it is not for everyone. I understand that a lot of people don't like it. Also, check out Jumper, though, guys. Hayden Christensen is good in that movie. Not time travel, though. It's more like space travel.
So
space
weird.
In the sense of occupying space.
It's so weird that you confuse those two. I love it.
The titles are extremely similar.
I suppose so. They're both 6 letters, and they end with "per." So that's nice.
Looper, Jumper, Gamer. It's the ER trilogy.
The ER trilogy. I dig it. My recommendation is not sci-fi, actually, but I was thinking about this movie while watching Back to the Future in the way that it also builds everything up, like the way that the circumstances kind of mount upon each other to make this just impossible, just to make any kind of success feel so implausible, like we'll never be able to do this. And whether or not it actually works out in the end, I'm not going to say, but I think it's also from 1985, weirdly enough. I would call this the third best movie of 1985 for my money. It's a movie I only just saw recently, and it's one that I haven't quite decided, but we might be talking about on Extra Milestone soon. It is Martin Scorsese's After Hours. Have you ever seen After Hours, Adonis?
I have. Okay. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, it's kind of different. It's a movie where Griffin Dunn is living in New York and just decides, you know what, I'm gonna have a good night. I'm gonna see what's out there, and everything that can go wrong does go wrong. It is like Chaos Theory, the movie, and it's remarkably exciting to watch just because of the amount of things that go wrong. Every time it looks like something's about to be okay, it gets reversed completely, and it goes on forever and ever. And it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It reminded me a lot of Uncut Gems, weirdly enough. So I would not be surprised if the Safdie brothers were a fan of this movie. But yeah, I believe that's on HBO Max, which is where I watched it. So check out After Hours if you haven't seen it. It's not like a traditional Scorsese movie that maybe is coming to mind when I say that, but believe me when I say that it is a hell of a time. It's a hell of a flick. And
oh yeah,
with that, I think that is the end of our episode. Adonis, thank you so much for joining me for this extra milestone.
Oh, of course, anytime, Sam.
If you liked this episode, then you're in luck because, as some of you may know, Adonis and I are going to be doing a lot more podcasting in the near future. We've already released the first episode of our podcast, Game Over, Man, where we're reviewing every Alien and Predator movie. And just a little teaser, the cat's out of the bag. Starting this Saturday, if you're listening to this the day that comes out, the first episode of our other podcast called A Nice Place to Visit is going to be released, and that's where we're reviewing every episode of The Twilight Zone, of Rod Serling's original TV show and beyond. And we think that you're going to really like it. The first episode of each of those are going to be free. And then after that, it is they can be found on the Cinemaholics Patreon page for as low as $2 a month. You'll get every episode of those podcasts and whatever else we produce down the line. I'm very excited about it. Adonis, let the people know, where can they find you on this world wide web of ours?
Of course. You can find me at the geographical location of... I'm kidding.
Give like the coordinates.
So like Sam said, you can find me on Cinemaholics. I am a frequent contributor. I write a lot about indie movies. I do some personal pieces every once in a while. I recently did one about the passing of Chadwick Boseman.
That was great, by the way. Definitely go read that.
Thank you. I just did one on The Nest. I have some... I'm sure you'll see me a lot more in the written form, but just spouting out jargon the same way I do on the podcast. You can see me on Game Over, Man, with Sam. He does it way better than I do.
I love how, because we put the exclamation point on that, and we agreed. Anytime we refer to the show, we've got to yell it like Bill Paxton does.
Oh, 100% we have to. You can see me on the Twilight Zone podcast, A Nice Place to Visit. And you can also check me out on Twitter at ADOGON21. That's at Adogon21. I tweet a lot of random stuff that doesn't always have to do with my content. So, be prepared for that. It's a lot. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Yeah. I'm also on Twitter at Nolan Sam. At Sam Nolan was taken. I will never forgive the person with that handle for that. And I'm also on Letterboxd, which I mentioned earlier in the show. That's just my name, Sam Nolan, relatively easy to find. Been on there for over 5 years, and it's where I spend most of my time online. So that's probably the best place. And with that, I believe we will sign off from the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. I'm Sam Nolan.
From 1955, performing live with Marty McFly, I'm Adonis Gonzalez.
And we'll see you on the next extra milestone.